My apologies to members of the public who are standing. We did put an application in to knock this dreadful place down and to build a suitable council chamber. Unfortunately, somebody objected and it's now a heritage asset, so we're stuck with it. So you're standing because of that. Right. Let's start with apologies for absence if we can, please. We've got Councillor Pam Cummings, Councillor Paul Cummings and Councillor Peter Watley. I think that's all that's absent. Thank you. Declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other disclosable interests. Anybody anything to declare? No? Thank you. Confirmation of previous minutes. Has anybody anything to raise from those minutes? Right, if I could take a proposer. Barbara, thank you, and a seconder. David, thank you. Those who approve the minutes, can you show, please, tonight? Right, I think that's everybody. Thank you. Chair's announcements. Officers and attendants. On my left, Simon Jones, who's a development manager in North. Next to him, Lee Walton, who's the case officer. And then we've got Kieran Power at the end, who's our big boss. And going to my right, we've got Jenny Aja. Right, one of these years. Our legal officer, and Bronwyn Tompkins, who's our Democratic Services officer. Right, we have no consultees with us today, so nobody from Highways, be unusual. I would thank all those members who attended the mandatory planning training sessions held on the 13th of November. Even if you didn't, you're okay till April, and hopefully we should have resolved that situation by then anyway, but depending what the new planning laws is coming anyway, so we'll see what happens. Apologies. It's because I've got my hearing aids in, I'm louder than normal. Right, yes, I've just said that, so anybody who didn't attend at the moment is still okay till April, because that's the end of the municipal year. I don't think I had anything else to say apart from Merry Christmas, because we won't meet at this meeting before then. There was an update report which was distributed, and everybody should have had time to read that. And we're on to our first item. Before we start that, you've all been very quiet so far. Some of you will be quite experienced about these committees, but we're not the House of Parliament, so we don't engage in shouting and rabble-rousing, and even, I'm afraid, clapping I tend to discourage. So if you'd be as silent as you've been so far, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. Right, so the application is land at Napleton Lane, Kemsey, and Lee, you're presenting, are you? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Everyone can hear me? I'm normally criticised for being a bit not so loud. Anyway, if I can run you through, Chairman, the overheads, and the first, which is the aerial image that locates the application site, which is outlined in red, which sits to the south of Kempsey. Also, just to note, which my pointer doesn't point, unfortunately, but to note Plover's Rise playing field, which is immediately to the north, and the yellow sign that indicates the alignment of the possible construction route taken by the larger delivery lorries. The red outline, and again, I think if we can just note the number 45 Bannet Hill. Yes. Thank you. Yes, so so you've got the proposed residential access requiring the demolition of 45 Banet Hill. You've also got the realignment of property of boundary treatment for the adjoining properties at that location. And to note, whilst it is the proposed permanent access for the residential development, it would also provide access for some of the smaller construction traffic entering the site. Here we have the land use and access parameter plan that shows the general setting out of the site. The built form's southern boundary would align, as you can see, with the existing built form to the west. We have the illustrative master plan. That's not one of the, wouldn't be one of the included approved plans at this point. So allowing for flexibility in considering the reserve matters that would come forward later. We have a drawing that shows the technical requirements for the permanent residential access to the site. As I said before, it involves the removal of one half of the semi-detached property in that location and the reduction of the garden areas to the adjacent properties. And at this point, I would note that I'm proposing an additional condition to the list that's been generated, which would ensure that the party wall that becomes the gable wall for 44 Banet Hill is made good, and a new means of enclosure for the adjacent gardens, their detail would need to come forward, and provide and the whole provided before the first use of the proposed access from Banet Hill, sorry. My glasses, I haven't got them on. So we come to the photographs. This just shows you from the public footpath that crosses the site. In the top one, you've got the built form. The proposed built form would be to the left. And then we've got images showing you the of Napleton Lane. So we can see the residential road that comes up from the A38 before it becomes more rural in approaching the site. An illustration of the possible construction access from Napleton Lane. The detail would come forward under condition 6, which would be considered by the Highways Authority. I think I would only note at this point, we're looking at quite a technical drawing that gives visibility, when in fact there would be banksmen involved in securing safe access along that road. And I would envisage that we ought to be looking at a surgical incision into the hedgerow, simply because the lorries would be arriving in first gear and departing in first gear, and they'd be aided by banksmen. So therefore, there is no requirement to achieve the technical requirements from highways. So that's the additional condition 24, which would seek to make good the remaining semi-detached gables wall. And the recommendation, Chairman, is to approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Right, first public speaker is the Parish Council representative, Councillor Rob Gardner. And Rob, you know how our system works, and you know that you get 3 minutes. Smack on. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. No? Can you hear me now? That's good. That's good. Good evening, everyone. It's an element of deja vu about this, isn't it? We've been here before. I'm a planner by profession, so forgive me if I get a little bit technical about this. Firstly, the application is contrary to the development plan, is in the countryside, will have ecological and landscape consequences to varying degrees, will lose valuable agricultural land and so on. All these are known, all these are set out in the report, and I don't intend to dwell on them beyond that. But since the development plan is old and you do not have a 5-year housing land supply, you have to apply a tilted planning balance if the development is sustainable. Officers point out that the village services have not kept pace with the nearly 600 dwellings that have or are being added to the village. In real terms, whether the location is sustainable is highly questionable. Residents say enough is enough, and that's clear. Secondly, it is clear that the report conclusion that the planning balance is in favour of the proposed development is a very fine one, but that balance is incomplete. It does not include the South Worcestershire Development Plan Review, which is a material consideration. The National Planning Policy Framework advises that the weight to be given to an emerging plan, even before adoption, increases with the stage it has reached. The review is now at an advanced stage. Following its examination, it has weight, but has been given none at all in the report. It is not even mentioned. That is an omission. From the review findings so far, we know that on adoption, there will be a 5-year housing land supply. From that, we know that the South Worcester Urban Extension can help meet housing needs in the near future. Indeed, there are already applications for early phase infrastructure, and there are housing developments almost entirely for affordable housing, either underway or in the pipeline. We know that the preferred development strategy is for new settlements and extensions to larger settlements, rather than additions to smaller towns and villages such as Kemsey. We know that further housing sites do not need to be allocated in Kemsey to meet the housing strategy. We know that the village boundary is not to be changed. We know that the development in the countryside, as here, is to be strictly controlled. Whether or not the committee is disposed towards the application, a decision either way without first undertaking a full and proper balancing exercise would be unreasonable. To undertake that exercise, you need to know the weight to be given to the review. But you do not have that information. It requires reasoned consideration, not a quick question and answer session, which might be obtained at this meeting. Technical here. Too close. That's a change. Thank you. Planning law is established for over 70 years that if you do not take into account something you should have, you will be acting unreasonably and your decision could be open to challenge. Your officers might want to explain what the Wednesbury principle is.
Thank you. That's over 3 minutes. You're not your normal accurate self. Right. Councillor Martin Allen, you are here as a member of the public, so you get 3 minutes the same. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. We ask you to refuse this application. It has been argued by all parties, or it's been agreed by all parties, that access from Fremantle Drive is not suitable for construction traffic. The initial proposed construction traffic route has been suggested as Nableton Lane, much of which is a single narrow lane. Yesterday, the applicant changed their minds and were unable to indicate an HGV access route. Without a construction traffic management plan, how do you know if any proposed access route is feasible? It's reasonable to ask for this plan to be produced first, so deferral today would be an option. This proposal goes against policy SWDP 21, Environmental Enhancement and Protection, notably in design. The proposal would represent inappropriate development in the open countryside. There would be an adverse impact on the existing rural landscape character, and it would result in unacceptable encroachment into the countryside. The proposal would cause substantial harm to the character and appearance of the local area. Therefore, it conflicts with policy SWDP 25, landscape character. As the officer's report admits, the local Kemsey school is oversubscribed. There is no indication where or how far new children to the village will have to travel to receive their education. We ask you, is it reasonable to put a 4 or 5-year-old on a bus for an hour each way? Would you do that to your grandchildren? Kemsey is without a dentist. There is only one small shop and a very limited bus service, and the officer's report notes the low frequency of public transport and that most travel to and from Worcester would be by private car. Therefore, this application fails the test of sustainable travel. The surgery has only one consulting room. Kemsey has become a town. It's larger than Upton. However, unlike Upton, it does not have the facilities to accommodate yet another increase in residents. Development in this location would bring about an unacceptable coalescence of the settlements of Kemsey and the much smaller hamlet of Napleton. Napleton currently retains its integrity. SWDP 21 Part 5 states the distinct identity and character of settlements should be safeguarded. This application fails that test. As also admitted in the officer's report, this application goes against SWDP 13, effective use of best and most versatile agricultural land. The benefits of this development do not significantly outweigh the loss of 5.5 hectares of valuable grade 2 agricultural land. This lost farming land adds yet more weight to a refusal. We ask you to refuse this application, not only for the sake of the residents of Kemsey, but also for the European protected dormice who currently call that field in Kemsey their home. Thank you.
We now have the applicant, Lawrence Dungworth from Hallam Land. You have 3 minutes as well. Thank you.
Good evening, councillors. Since the previous application was refused, we have worked hard to address the reasons for refusal and have made significant changes to the scheme. The application before you today has the support of your officers. It's not by chance that your officers support this scheme, it's because there's a significant need for new homes and the limited harm do not outweigh the extensive benefits. We are in a housing crisis. I imagine that the majority of us in this room do not feel that, as we are homeowners and we will be going home tonight to a safe and secure home. In the 21st century, that should be a right for everyone, but unfortunately, homelessness and housing registers continue to increase. Within Malvern Hills alone, there are 1,200 households with a local connection on the housing register. That is an increase from 900 in 2022. The reality is the planning system is broken. It fails those in need of affordable housing. They are unrepresented and often forgotten. Planning decisions are now less about policies and more about objections. Imagine if the 1,200 households on the housing register were in the room today. This equates to approximately 2,700 people. Nationally, our government is very clear there is a housing crisis and that it must be resolved. In June, the government published figures on the councils with the most decisions overturned at appeal. Sadly, Malvern Hills find themselves 18th out of 324 councils nationally. Not only is that bad for those in need of housing, but it's also bad for council taxpayers. Each year the council spends tens, if not hundreds of thousands defending planning appeals. Money which would be better spent on infrastructure, roads and other council services. The exact issues that objectors often raise when opposing new housing. There will be some improvement to the housing supply when the updated SWDP is adopted. However, the inspectors have found that the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year land supply through the plan on adoption. This position will only worsen in July next year when the council is required to apply a 20% buffer up from 5% to its housing calculations. It will once again not have a 5-year land supply and additional sites will be needed, and the application before you can help plug the shortfall. Whilst there is some opposition to this application, I ask you today to determine the application on its planning merits. It has support from officers and will deliver a wide range of benefits, including new public open space, play areas, over 10% BNG gain, over £1 million in financial contributions, and critically, 40 homes for those in most need. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I first question, Kieran. We had a claim that we won't have a 5-year supply once the plan is adopted. My information is somewhat different to that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we have had the numerous correspondence with the inspector who's dealing with the examination of the local plan. The latest confirmation from the inspector is that on adoption we would have a 5-year supply based on a 5% buffer. So that's confirmed in the most recent hearing letter. I think the hearings were in September, and that followed a letter. The next stage is, in terms of the plan, to consult on main modifications associated with the plan. So there's a number of recommendations that the inspectors, I should say, made in relation to that plan, and that will happen in the near future in terms of that consultation. So it is making progress as well. Thank you, Chair.
And really, from a different direction, what weight could be given to the SWDPR at this stage?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So it is at an advanced stage, as one of the speakers mentioned today. The weight attributed to it is a matter of the decision maker. In Office's view, at this point, we're still cautious about the level of weight, given that we're still consulting or need to consult on main modifications on that. So the advice that officers offer to members is that that it still attracts limited weight in the balance. Like I say, it's a matter for the decision maker from that perspective. Once we are, like I said, there's further rounds of consultation in relation to the main modifications, and again that will start to attract more weight as well in terms of decision making. I think in terms of 5-year housing land supply, certainly at the moment, we would still recommend that members accept that we do not have a 5-year housing land supply, and the tilted balance is engaged from that perspective. So hopefully that just clarifies those points. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison, you're on. Oh, Tom, have you got a point?
Chairman, if I may, if I heard it correctly, the comment from the applicant was that in the event that we are able to adopt our plan, the 20% buffer would come into play quite quickly, and in that event we wouldn't have a supply. I think that was the contention being made, and I don't think Kieran addressed that point.
Yeah, sorry, I'd missed that. So on adoption, there's a requirement under the sort of interim arrangements under the old plan making scheme, which we're operating under, to have for decision making purposes a 5% buffer. There's also a case for a 10% buffer, but it's complicated, and ultimately the 10% buffer essentially ends anyway from July, where there's a requirement July next year to have a 20% buffer. So ultimately we adopt with 5%. We have a 5-year housing land supply with a 5% buffer on adoption, and then from July next year we'd have to demonstrate a 20% buffer. Now what we'll have to do, we do an assessment, an annual assessment of housing delivery across the district to see what was delivered in that period of time, in the previous period, to see what it comes out at, essentially. So I can't tell you today whether we'd be meeting a 20% buffer or not, but I certainly can't say that we wouldn't. So I think from July, that the 20% buffer bites, but it doesn't mean we wouldn't necessarily achieve that. But on adoption, so from March, April, when adoption happens, we would be adopting with the supply. Then there might be, but we don't have those. We ultimately don't have those figures because we don't do that exercise until the annual monitoring. So it's not data we have currently. So I genuinely don't have the answer to that.
Thank you, David.
Still querying Kieran, I'm afraid. Sorry, Kieran. I haven't got to my lot yet. This is quite an interesting statement regarding the 20% buffer and the 5% buffer and what have you. And it's all down to the main modifications that have been sent to the inspector for alteration of the existing plan that's been agreed with them. My question to you is, are there any questions or statements in there to do with the 5% or 20% buffer because I thought all of that was resolved earlier on in September.
Through the chair. So in terms of the 5% buffer, the most recent inspectors' correspondence from those hearing sessions accepted that on adoption we would have a five-year supply with a 5% buffer based on those hearing sessions and the supply that we identified. So that was accepted in terms of the letter from the inspector. So in terms of that on adoption, that was the key. So the 20% buffer doesn't really come into examination perspective. So that's something that we know is coming and will happen, but it doesn't come into the fact whether a plan is sound to adopt or whether we meet a supply from plan making perspective at this stage. If there's hopefully that makes sense. So it's 5, 10 and 20% buffers. I know it's all
Complicated.
quite confusing,
Thank you.
but yeah, thank you.
Didn't actually answer my question. My question was, were there any correspondence or questions asked by the inspector regarding the 5% buffer in the latter questions that you've had to respond to before Christmas, i.e. before the end of November, I believe?
I'm not sure. I mean, there's multiple questions to respond to as always, but in terms of the buffer and the position on that, the inspectors were comfortable that the things within the supply could be provided. The only additional questions we've had or provided additional information on is on site specific about deliveries, but ultimately the position is that published letter really in terms of where the conclusions are. I mean, what I should say is that the main modifications consultation will occur, but we still have to get the final inspector's letter to post consultation on the main modifications, which will give the final position of the inspector. So again, there is. It's a stage process from that perspective, but I can only tell you what we've been told so far and what's in the public domain in terms of the 5% buffer, which has been set out in that most recent inspector's letter. So
Right, Councillor Allison, have you finished?
Just finishing that off. Thank you, Kieran. I did know that because I read all the questions that they've asked, the inspectors have asked, and haven't read any of the responses because they haven't been published. So I knew there was nothing there. That's why I was just asking the question to clarify it in front of this public meeting. Thank you.
Right, so you're on as local councillor now, David, if you'd like to present.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members, for being here. Thank you, the members of public, the officers for doing the report, the site visit that we had. All interesting stuff. This is the third time this has been before planners at Malvern. First time it was refused, second time it was refused, and now it's here again. The Hallam Land had plenty of time to submit this site or any other site to the inspectors and for working on it as a site for housing. It was not taken forward. I don't know whether it was submitted. It was certainly not taken forward. It's not been discussed by the inspectors at their proposals, because I have been to most of them, as most of you know. Right. There has been no discussion, as far as I'm aware, between Hallam Land Management, or whatever they like to call themselves. I hope that's about right. District councillors, nothing reported by Kempsey Parish Council to have taken place, and no viewing by any residents that I'm aware. A document was released on the first proposal put forward, and that is all, nothing else. That's contrary to the SWDP. Most documents refer here to Fremantle Drive being the road altered. This is totally incorrect, as the people doing the traffic survey for the Monday to Friday excluded football on the playing field at weekends. It's actually in Bannet Hill where they're proposing to alter the road. For your information, Fremantle Drive has 4 houses, numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4. It's very tricky. Where do I start? There's so many inadequacies. I'm going to start with this one. It's called the Geophysical Survey Report, submitted by Orion Heritage Limited on behalf of Hallam Land Management. I'm just going to read you a very small statement that is on page 2. It says site details, postcode WR5 3PZ. That's not far out. Location. The site is located 7.5 kilometres northeast of Worcester and 8.5 kilometres east of Holt Heath. The survey area is bounded to the east by Newland Road, to the north by Woodland Way, and to the west by Pulley Lane. It's in Worcestershire. It's not in Malvern Hills. According to this, it's in Wychavon. It's in Droitwich parish of Solwarp. Need I say any more? There's plenty more on there about it. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know who checked it. I don't know how it got through all of our planners, but it did. And there's a lot like that throughout the whole document. I'm not going to dwell on things because it's otherwise I could be here all day and night and what have you, and I do have other things to do. But I'd like to first take you back to the original outline planning application 22/01093 outline, which came before the committee, was originally started in August of 2022. There were a series of reasons for refusal at that meeting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. South Worcester Development Plan policy sets out where development strategy for the adopted plan is to provide for and to facilitate the delivery of sufficient housing needed until 2030. Council can demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply. That was at that time. Not arguing that at all. Taking all the above into consideration, the proposal would represent inappropriate development in the open countryside, which should have an adverse impact on the existing rural landscape character and result in unacceptable encroachment into the countryside. The proposal is therefore recommended for refusal. Not mine, don't worry. The proposal is therefore contrary to the policies within the South Worcester Development Plan. I'll list those because they may become apparent in a bit. SWDP 1, 2, 4 and 6 and Part 2, 4, 9, 14 and 16 of the National Planning Policy Framework. There's 3 more conditions there. I'm not bothering to read them because our officers can pick them up and what have you if this goes for a refusal. The proposal is therefore contrary to SWDP 28, 29, 30 of the South Worcester Development Plan and Part 14 of the National Planning Policy Framework. So that was in 2022 and what have you, which came before us here as a council. Then it came back a year later, what have you, to come across what I call a lake. I think that's the best way of saying it. Again, there were a series of reasons for refusal and what have you. This time there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 2 I've taken out because they would no longer think. The proposed development place further unacceptable pressure on existing infrastructure and services in the village. You've already heard about that. And would generate significant demand for additional primary school places, which cannot be met within the existing village school because it's oversubscribed, likely to remain so for the foreseeable future, and has no capacity for further expansion. They have used the money that they have had from 2 previous developments in Kemsey to double the size of the school. So it's double what it was 5 years ago. So it can't take any more. There's no room for it. And I'm sure the local residents around it have enough problems with it is. But the developer here is going to provide £200,000 for the primary school children to be taken to a school. Great. Where? Pershore is one of the suggestions. They can't go to Martley because I think Councillor Walton will say it's full. I don't know whether they can go to Powick. Councillor Wells?
Chairman, since I've been named, I would just like to say that it's important when we're considering capacity for our local village schools to also bear in mind that there are people, you mentioned Powick, who come into Powick from Malvern and Worcester. So I don't know what the situation is in Kemsey, but you're asking me specifically about the capacity in Powick.
Yes.
Absolutely true that Powick is full, but it's about a third of its population comes from outside the catchment. Now, I don't know whether that's the same in Kemsey. So when we're assessing provision, supply and demand, we need to bear in mind actually who is populating that school at this time, whether there is in time capacity to adopt and accommodate any future housing.
Thank you for that, Councillor Wells. Could I ask you just to not ask questions of the councillors, David, else we might be here all night. Thank you. And to be honest, I mean, we've gone through the education route. We've actually already been told that it doesn't matter how bad it is, we have to treat it as an irrelevance. I'm sorry, but that's even a High Court decision on. I shouldn't be reacting to yours, but I'm going to. We have been told that. We've often turned down things because of that reason, and we've been turned over by inspectors. And I say there's a High Court decision on it. So education, as though we are concerned about it, we're not really allowed to consider it.
Are we allowed to consider the roads? Oh no, sorry.
Sorry.
Just to clarify on the education point, because it is a material planning consideration in terms of provision and infrastructure within the area. I think obviously the county education authority have commented in terms of their provision, and they have a statutory responsibility to provide school places. So from that perspective, the duty of providing those spaces falls on them to plan, to provide and make provision. So I won't go into what they've said. Obviously, members will be aware of that, and if there needs any further clarification, but just it is material. But in terms of the weight attributed, obviously that's something that needs to be considered. And I just wanted to sort of pick that point up just for clarity. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Essentially, I'll take a slight correction, but essentially I'm correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No problems at all. The last refusal had questions to be asked about discharge of the suds. Where was the water going to go? What's happening? And what have you? And I still ask the same question because there's nothing there. There's nothing about most of the stuff. It is in an outline, but we are there to make a decision on how to deal with something that we have no idea what's going to come forward. And that was clearly obvious in that while I've been working on this over the last 3 weeks, we've had 3 different accesses for construction traffic, 2 along Napleton Lane, and the third one is that they won't probably use Napleton Lane. Where they'll use, I have no idea. I would just like to say that Napleton Lane is a narrow lane. You've probably seen the videos, you've seen the comments from everybody. My piece to resistance, I suppose, is the biggest road that we have by us is called the M5 motorway. You can't get on it in Kemsey unless you do a double shuffle and get on it at High Green, which you can, and I have many times. Legally as well, by the way, so you know. But I don't know. I really don't know. This is just an absolute nightmare, not knowing what is going to happen, where access is going to be. You know, as I say, we've just had the notification come through that they won't be, or well, no, sorry, it didn't say it. I think it said that they probably wouldn't be able to use the access off Napleton Lane, but they didn't say they wouldn't. They said they probably couldn't. So, are we talking about Napleton Lane? We're not talking about Napleton Lane. I don't know, but the M5 motorway. I'll go back to that. It's a very critical piece of infrastructure, and we can't use it. We go north to south on it, which is great. When they built it, I was living in Kemsey. I was living, and the depot was right outside my property. But they couldn't use Napleton Lane, and they couldn't use the crossroads between Post Office Lane and Green Street as an access to the M5 construction traffic, because the construction traffic was deemed too big. Now, the construction traffic 50 years ago was about a quarter of the size of what we've got now. So, you know, take your own opinion on that sort of thing. They had to, and between the two bridges, between the Bestman's Lane one and the Green Street one, they had to put a slip road all alongside the motorway to get the construction traffic from one area to the other. And they did that in many places.
David, you're well over time. If there's
I am going to wrap up, if that's all right with you. I really don't know what to do here. I would love to refuse it. I'd love to defer it, but I'm not going to do either or say either that I will do until I've heard all the arguments put forward and we come to the end to make a proposition. If nobody's made a proposition at that time, I'd like to make a proposition then. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor
Sorry, it's
Harrison.
short and doesn't include everything I wrote down.
Councillor John Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Thank you, Lee, for your report, and for the guest speakers who are well versed in commenting on this application. One of the issues that I've been dealing with for many years is the parking issues in Bannet Hill. There's been adequate parking for the existing development, despite several requests from me to Platform Housing to address this. As in the mornings, evenings and weekends, there is difficulty for service vehicles, ambulances, fires, appliances and refuge vehicles to access into Bannet Hill. The loss of parking due to demolition of the existing affordable home, 4 places will be lost and not compensated until a development is complete. Now, this development will mean at least another 150 cars on site. That will add to an already congested route down to the A38. And as the majority of residents will be commuting to work by car or to access the limited infrastructure in the village over half a mile away. I note the officer's comments regarding the unsuitability of the site, and I know this has been commented on before. I will comment on it again, and I suggest perhaps the weighting provided by the officer to these objections to the development needs to be reinterpreted in the light of the arguments that have been presented tonight. I reiterate, the growth of Kemsey has not been matched by improvements in local services and infrastructure over many years, and this development in open countryside exacerbates the situation. The proposed development conflicts with policy SWDP2 and the Kemsey Neighbourhood Plan Policy K2 regarding spatial development strategy. There would be an adverse effect on the character and appearance of the local area contrary to policy SWDP 6, 21, 24 and 25. And also there'll be the loss of best and most versatile agricultural land re SWDP 13. Now, we've heard from the applicant that there's a housing shortfall mentioned, of 1,200 or whatever the figure may be. Now, we have an existing plan. The southern urban extension of Worcester, most of it within the Kemsey area, will provide 2,400 houses, much of which is now being built out. And the soon-to-be ratified SWDPR has already designated a new town at Worcestershire Parkway for up to 10,000 houses, commencing from 2031. That will have far better infrastructure and travel links than any further speculative developments in Kemsey can offer. Now, there's a legitimate concern not only in the respect of this application, but for the general future of the village, or is it a town now? In the light of other areas in which Hallam and other developers have an interest, is the danger of ribbon development down the A38 that should be resisted, as the current services infrastructure, already overwhelmed, is ruining what used to be an organically growing village community. And I have serious doubts about the sustainability of this development, but I'm willing to listen to my other councillors before I conclude my decision. Thank you.
Michael, that almost balanced up Councillor Harrison's name. Right, other councillors. Councillor Wells.
Chairman, thank you. I think it's fair to say that every member of this committee has been placed in an invidious position for many months, indeed years, when we are faced with this really difficult and challenging application before us this evening. I've listened to what has been said, I've read the representations made, and I have huge sympathy with everybody who's given their time and trouble to attend this meeting this evening. Oh, if life were so simple. We know, Chairman, from our appeals, the most recent one only this week, where once again the Government Planning Inspectorate are reminding us that unless there's significant and demonstrable harm, we ought to be, with the tilted balance, approving such applications. Now, that's not what anyone wants to hear, but that is the truth we are faced with. Now, I have always had a problem in defining what significant and demonstrable actually is. No one would disagree that there's a degree of harm associated with this development if it were to go ahead. Is it significant? Is it moderate? How do we assess these things? These are very subjective things. There's no absolute measure by which we can assess these. So it's left in the eye of the beholder. Chairman, more critically, I'm concerned about the access for construction vehicles, which seems to be far from concluded in terms of what would be proposed. Now, it seems to me, from what I've heard, that the Highway Authority would subsequently investigate and consider and give approval to a construction traffic plan. But aren't we putting the cart and the horse the wrong way round at this point? Surely the applicant should be obtaining such permission before we decide whether this application should go forward or not. And I, for one, am uncomfortable with granting permission this evening, which kind of says to the Highway Authority, well, they've granted permission, so you ought to be, acquiescing to this now, rather than considering what's in the public interest in terms of highway safety and amenity for villagers. I was concerned to hear in the presentation that the visibility displays would not be achieved, but the banksman would be there to ensure the safe movement in and out of sight. I'm not sure that's sufficient for me, because if the driver can't see where he's going and was relying on a third party to usher him in or out, I wonder what would happen if there was an accident. Who would be culpable? The driver, the banksman, the construction company, or nobody? So I would much prefer us to defer the application this evening and allow the Highway Authority to respond and confirm the arrangements for the construction traffic. That would be my proposal, a deferral to allow the Highway Authority to consider that properly. Then we'd come back with some idea about exactly what we're supporting or not.
Following their normal procedure today, these days, I'm not taking that as a proposal at this stage. Any other councillor wishing to speak? Councillor Dan Walton.
Thanks, Chair. Just going back to the subject of SWDPR, I think I was elected in 2019 and we were working on it then. So we're we're what, sounds like we're 3 months away from it potentially being adopted. So surely that's got to offer some weight in terms of decision making, bearing in mind that 3 months compared to what, 6 years is, you know, not a long time at all. And I think in things like this, where we're saying come April of next year, which will soon come around, before we know it, it'll be Easter again, you know, we should be thinking about the fact that we are going to have enough housing by that point. So we should really be bearing that in mind, surely, when it comes to making big decisions like this. And I take on board what Tom's just said, because I saw obviously the appeal decision, but time is moving quick and these things roll around. And it's just in my mind thinking back to what Kieran was saying before, how soon that seems. So that's kind of where my mind is with this, and with other potential developments of this size, that, you know, whilst we do need housing, and we definitely do need housing, if we are going to have enough by that point, then shouldn't we be making decisions based on that at this point now?
Thank you. Anybody else? No. I must admit, I've got several thoughts on this. The tilted balance, of course, is really a big bugbear and the elephant in the room. In effect, the lack of housing within the country, and specifically we're told within this area at the moment, is important, and that almost we're told to set virtually everything else aside in that favour. At the same time, and we have got the SWDPR within 3-4 months, is going to change the situation, change our decision situation totally, without changing anything in reality. What houses will be there in 4 months' time, I suspect, will be very much the same as what houses are there now. So we've got a 2-year supply now, and in 3 or 4 months' time, we have got a 5-year supply. Magically, those houses have appeared. I cannot conceive it. Because I am aware of our responsibility to be aware of this tilted balance and act accordingly. At the same time, I tend to agree with Councillor Wells. I think in an application of this need, if it was an easy access, well, no doubt it would be well and truly in there, and the highways would have said yes, ticked it off in their normal manner. It isn't an easy access. It surely should have, in this case, not been an easy one, of being put in front of us so we have sufficient information to decide on it. But I say, I'm at the moment, even at this last second, before I suppose we go to a vote on a proposal, undecided because of that tilted balance. And for members of the public, and I'm going to address you, you'll see how difficult it is for us. It isn't an easy decision. Things that you obviously think are common sense, so do we. Unfortunately, we're not confined by common sense, we're confined by planning law, which changes in different situations. Right, have we, Councillor Harrison, I'll go to you first if you want to propose a motion.
We've already got a proposal, so we need to second it.
Sorry, Kieran.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to pick up on a couple of points in terms of, I think there was mention of the weight attributed to the plan and the timing and things like that. So I thought it would be useful just before we get a bit further on, and probably a bit about the construction environmental management plan as well, just to help members. So in terms of the weight attributed to the plan, the reason we're cautious as officers at the minute is because there is this main modifications consultation that has to happen. And ultimately, the modifications are required in order for the plan to be deemed sound by the inspector. Well, that's why they've recommended modifications to the plan as it is. But we do have to carry out public consultation on that, and we need to be in a position that we could listen and reflect and change, and so that creates some uncertainty around it. That's why we're taking that cautious approach. It's also important that decisions are made based on policies on the day a decision's made. So it's really important that it's not a motivation to delay a decision. I know that's not what members intended, but I'm just sort of making that point really. In terms of the construction environmental management plan, you'll all be aware that that's sort of standard practices to include a condition in relation to those matters. I appreciate that sometimes there will be difficulties around solutions. We have engaged with the County Highway Authority multiple times. I know Lee's been back and forth probably 3 or 4 times in relation to this specific issue about that, and they're comfortable that there is a solution available. So we've had that provision in terms of their view. We haven't got a detailed scheme that would be secured by condition, and they would have to discharge that. But that's the usual route. And I think just to, ultimately there is lots of difficult builds throughout the country that happen, and construction environmental management plans tend to be achievable in some form. Whether that is Banksman's, whether that's even in terms of different access points that could be looked at as part of that. It's not closed at this stage, but ultimately the highway advice is that they believe that there is an achievable solution, even though we haven't had those put forward. So that's the advice that we've been given. And they have, and like I say, the County Highway Authority have recommended that condition as well. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Cathy Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Kieran, just to clarify what you were saying there, it may be my lack of experience, although I've been here a few years, but I don't often remember access, highways saying that access can probably be decided later and can be worked out, and they think there'll be a way. That's to me seems unfamiliar, and I just wondered, is that a normal thing for them to do?
It is in relation to construction traffic for the access to the site. Although it's outlined, the details of access in terms of once the developments, if it was to be built, the accesses would be approved today in terms of that. But in terms of the construction traffic, that is usually dealt with by condition on most schemes. Thank you.
And just to come back, we have had definite approval from Highways of the access for the residents, should there be any in the future.
Yes, that's correct, Councillor. So in terms of the proposed access to the site, that would become the permanent access into the site. Highways have agreed that that is acceptable in highway terms, so including the route in. I believe there has been some surveys and testing of that as well from a highways perspective. They still require various highway approvals subsequent to planning permission being granted if that was the case. So there's still a technical approval staged for highways to be adopted, but that's in terms of their current position from a planning perspective, they've raised no objection.
Thank you for your clarification questions, Cathy. Councillor Tom Wells, do you still wish to proceed with that motion?
Chairman, I do. I've listened carefully to what has been said by the officers. This isn't just another application. This is a significant application. Is it 99 houses? The construction period will be, from my experience, at least a year. So this isn't just something that's going to come and go in a blink of an eye. This will be an ongoing implication on the community, both from an amenity point of view, probably more importantly from a highway safety point of view. And I am not confident, I'm afraid to say this, I'm not confident the Highway Authority has given this the due attention it needs at this stage. And I would be more comfortable in seeing what that plan looked like before I were to grant permission this evening. So I recognise it's an unusual request, and more routinely we would expect the Highway Authority to deal with the applicant subsequent to this decision. In this circumstance, given the scale and degree of this application and the lack of certainty that I have, that we've even identified at all what's actually going to come in and from where and when and how it will be managed. So I believe personally that the way forward this evening would be to defer this application and invite the applicant to meet and discuss properly and construct a viable plan. And then we would then have something more substantial upon which to make our decision. And just on a slightly different issue, of course, if this were to go to an appeal, it would be the circumstances that prevail at the time of the appeal, not this evening, that would be the predominant background document. So I think we need to bear that in mind as well.
Thank you. Seconder for that motion. Dan Walton. So the motion is, do you want to put it?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the motion on the table, what I'd sort of ideally like members to confirm is on voting on this particular issue that they're accepting of the other matters, because ultimately the applicant needs some certainty about what the next steps are. So ultimately, if it's deferral for a particular reason, they need certainty that we're not going to then raise various other reasons when it returns to committee after deferral, if that makes sense. So ultimately, if the critical point it relates to construction traffic, then that's appropriate to defer on. But you would by not raising other matters or not moving a refusal, if there was something unsurmountable, that would mean that a deferral wasn't the right move. That would be sort of not reasonable from that perspective. So I just need to clarify that. I hope that makes sense. I've probably rambled a bit.
Councillor Wells.
Chairman, I'm conscious that we have local members here who may have thoughts as well. Kieran, I'm deeply uncomfortable with that, because there are other considerations yet to be determined. Rather than say simply, well, if the management plan is produced, we don't really need to bring it back to committee because that's been then addressed. I would want this to come back to committee, and for other issues that there may appear in the meantime, should be properly considered. So I'm not suggesting, I think I may have misunderstood what you're saying. I'm saying we're not in a position to make a decision personally until I've seen that management plan and it's been properly considered and agreed by the Highway Authority. That is what I'm moving this evening. That doesn't mean, this is the point, it doesn't mean that I may ultimately not support the application for other issues, but I want this issue resolved first.
Kieran, can you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difficulty of that is ultimately if you just to describe the situation, if you're going to refuse this on various other matters, for instance, you would include potentially a reason for refusal based on lack of information in relation to the construction environmental management plan, rather than defer, because deferring ultimately gives no certainty to the developer. And what it also leaves us open is to an appeal against non-determination as well, and potential costs for delaying a decision. And then if it comes back and then we add a load of reasons for refusal, which we could have dealt with today, that delay isn't really acceptable from a cost perspective in terms of reasonable behaviour. So that's where I'm nervous on. So that's why I was trying to tease out whether your position was subject to that matter in terms of the environment, the construction management plan being resolved, whether you were comfortable in those other areas. And if that's not the case, I think that possibly creates some issues with the deferral.
Councillor Wells.
Oh, Chairman, complicated. It was never going to be simple, this, was it? You're persuading me to move refusal, effectively. But if we're going to go down that road, and we may in a minute, members of this committee may have other reasons for refusal in addition to the lack of a properly thought out and thorough transport plan for the construction traffic. There may be other issues that members have raised that they would want to build in. So if the mood of the meeting now is actually to refuse, then I would suggest members may have other reasons for refusal in addition to this.
Yeah. Please. Councillor Walton.
I just wanted to add to that the reason why I wanted to second what Tom was saying is that I just thought we needed more information on that one specific point. But actually, the overriding decision would be made at a certain point in time where obviously things can change anyway. So particularly we talked about education and whatnot. So in terms of seconding that particular motion this evening, it was based on just wanting more information on that one specific point, but not on the largest scheme of the actual application. So I think Tom's probably right that we should probably remove that and go somewhere else with it.
So you're withdrawing that motion at the moment?
Chairman, I think I am, because I've been persuaded by the planning officer that we would need to. I think we won't rehearse it again. I think Councillor Walton and I are probably. So I will remove that and replace it with a motion to refuse.
Yeah. That's not acceptable, I'm afraid. I did tell you at the beginning, we aren't at the House of Commons. We do behave in a more respectable way. Thank you. Walton, are you content with that? Just for formality.
I am. I don't know if one of the ward members wants to. I know David was siding on the
Refusal.
considering that. So if David wants to take that rather than myself, that's okay.
Councillor Harrison, because you've probably got reasons for refusal, I imagine. If you...
Well, there's lots of reasons, Mr. Chairman, for you've only got to look at the previous two applications that were both refused, and both refused with lots and lots of conditions. You know, it's very tricky to sort of do it. But, you know, nothing has been mentioned here about the hundreds or thousands or whatever there is of supposed to be minerals that are going to be taken out of this site. It's in there from the Worcester County Council, but they don't say how they're going to take them out. We don't know whether there's any in there. It hasn't been, I don't know whether the officers know more. The suds pond that's put in there, we asked about that last time, and what have you, and what was going to happen to the water. Is it going to go down and flood the A38? We don't know. They haven't mentioned a thing about it this time. It's not even in any of their correspondence about the suds pond. And to my mind, this is, sorry, I'm going to probably annoy some people. This to me is a pure speculative development from an agent who's in London. Doesn't matter really where he lives. They haven't got a sort of a may not have a buy.
David, I think we need something more specific than that if we're going to refuse.
Well, why?
Councillor Wells wishes to be in a situation.
I'm sure officers will be more than happy to accommodate in the policies, to say policies we have and the emerging policies relevant to this application. I think the key thing is the point I made earlier, Chairman, about significant and demonstrable harm. That's a high marker. Now, I would argue there is significant and demonstrable harm in this occasion, okay? That's my subjective view, and that's all you can go on, because there's nothing that you can add up or take away. It's in the eye of the beholder. It's in terms of the impact it would have on the surrounding landscape and the wider community. So I would move that it does create significant and demonstrable harm, and therefore the tilted balance, though applied, fails. And we then support that with a whole range of policies that we've already got saved in our current plan and the emerging plan, and I'm sure officers will be able to help us articulate that into some robust reasons for refusal. So I'm now moving refusal because it does constitute significant demonstrable harm.
Right. Kieran.
Councillor Wells, you need to quantify or qualify the topics of the harm that you're alleging. I know on the previous decisions there are a number of reasons. So if members feel that those reasons still apply, then let us know. But we can't sort of we can't second guess the members' feelings on that. You need to make it clear.
I'm going to adjourn for 5 minutes so the councillors can sort out, because it does seem that there needs some clarification of this. Councillor John Michael.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment that I was happy to support the original proposal to defer, but only on the basis that everything would be back on the table again, because things do change. And I think to restrict it just to the one item is not acceptable in my opinion.
Sorry, yes, I'm adjourning for 5 minutes at least. Thank you. Right, can I call the meeting to order, please? Are we ready to go? Thank you. Councillor Tongwells, I think you've got a complete proposal now.
Chairman, I didn't intend to speak this evening. Chairman, I crave your indulgence. This is going to take a moment or two to read out. So in essence, I'm moving refusal for the following reasons. First of all, the site is bounded to the north by a narrow lane unsuitable for large vehicles, which would need to visit the site during the construction phase. The application contains inadequate details relating to the routing and access to the site by construction traffic, and consequently presents an unacceptable risk to highway safety. That is a new one. That is not one that was incorporated in any previous reasons for refusal. Now, returning to those reasons for refusal last time, some of them are relevant, some of them are not. So if I may, Chairman, I'll read out the ones I believe to be relevant. The proposed development would place further unacceptable pressure on existing infrastructure and services in the village. In particular, the proposal would generate a significant demand for additional primary school places which cannot be met within the existing village school because it is oversubscribed and likely to remain so for the foreseeable future and has no capacity for further expansion. The lack of convenient access to a primary school for new residents within reasonable travel distance would lead to greater reliance on the use of the private car, which is unlikely to be adequately mitigated by provision of a school bus service. Additionally, it is unclear how such a bus service would be managed in practice and whether a financial contribution would adequately meet safeguarding requirements. Turning on to the character and appearance, the proposed development would adversely affect the character and appearance of the area by introducing development that projects outwards from the existing built form rather than integrating as discrete infill or rounding off of the existing development. Furthermore, the scale and elevated position of the proposed development represents a substantial intrusion into the rural countryside to the south of Kempsey, which is experienced from numerous public vantage points, including the public rights-of-way which run through and surround the site. The development would also contribute to the unacceptable coalescence between Kempsey and nearby hamlet of Napleton. The development would diminish in the intrinsic character and beauty of the open countryside, and consequently the development would be contrary to policies SWDP 5, 21 and 25 of the South Worcestershire Development Plan and Policy K7 of the Kempsey Neighbourhood Plan and paragraph 180 of the NPPF. I'm nearly there, Chairman. In addition to the other harms identified, the proposed development would result in the loss of Grade 2 agricultural land that has been used for arable production, remains suitable for that purpose, and that is considered worthy of protection. The development is therefore contrary to policy SWDP 13 and 180 of the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework. And finally, Chairman, no mechanism, a Section 106 agreement, has been entered into to secure a financial contribution to mitigate the impact of the development in terms of highways, community infrastructure, local healthcare, education, and to secure the provision of affordable housing and the management and maintenance of public open space. As such, the application is contrary to policies SWDP 2, 7, 15 and 39 of the South Worcestershire Development Plan, as well as the guidance contained within the SWDP Developer Contributions, July 2018. Chairman, I think that's it. What I would move is, and no, I don't suppose the officers were able to write all that down as quickly as I was reading it. So happy to provide the officers with that text and perhaps suggest that we allow, if we are to refuse this evening, officers to work with local members to refine that wording, but within the spirit of what I've just said. So fine tuning.
I would ask if there's any councillor not clear on those reasons. No, thank you. I would then ask for a second. Councillor Howson?
I will be seconded, but there are a couple more I think that should be included. John mentioned some. The one that, or the two that I've got down here, the proposed development fails to provide a sufficient amount of information in order to demonstrate that the proposed development can be accommodated without a detrimental impact on the highway safety entrance for the existing network. Do you understand what I mean? Getting into the site. Improved access into the site, or an access into the site. Therefore, that would be contrary to policy SWDP 4 of the South Worcester Development Plan and Part 9 of the National Planning Policy Framework. The second one I had was that the proposed development fails to provide sufficient amount of information in order to demonstrate that the proposed development can be accommodated without a detrimental impact on the existing drainage network and flood risk in the area. This is because the water, I assume, don't know because we haven't been told, will go to the Suds Pond shown on that plan as number 6. Where it goes from there, we don't know. Does it flood the A38? We don't know what happens. We haven't got any information whatsoever.
Right, Councillor Wells, a slight modification there.
Chairman, I think there are additions rather than modifications.
Yeah, additions.
Chairman, I think we're all conscious, aren't we, in terms of the highway safety issue, however we perceive this individually. Unfortunately, the Highway Authority has not registered an objection. If the council were minded to refuse this evening and fight an appeal, it would have to provide its own highway consultant to argue that case. Members need to be aware of that. I think on balance, I'd prefer it not to be in there because I think it weakens our case rather than strengthens it, to be honest.
Councillor Harrison.
But the drainage, yeah.
Sorry, so the first one to do with the highways. So you think the access is okay? There is talk, but it's not confirmed, obviously, or anything, that the residents may be getting an expert, if this was approved, to fight that. About the access.
But we have to vote on what
We
we've
have
got
to
at the
vote on
moment.
what
The
we've got.
information we got from Highways is they considered that to be satisfactory at the moment. But even if that case came about, of course, and if there's an appeal, then the residents can actually put in a report to the inspectors to show that they consider that not to be safe. So this doesn't actually need to be in at the moment. So would you be content for it to be withdrawn, that part?
I would. Just finish off the other one to do with the drainage proposal is therefore contrary to SWDP 28, 29, 30 of the SWDP and Part 14 of the MPPF.
And you're content with that, Tom?
Chairman, I think the second point is well made, and I would be more than happy to incorporate that in the reasons for refusal.
Thank you. I think Kieran now wishes to give us some advice before we take the vote.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, I thought it's probably helpful to run through the points just as a matter of fact in terms of where we are in terms of consultees, etc. I think members know, but I'll just run through that. So, in terms of the first reason for refusal in relation to construction traffic, obviously that's been quite discussed in detail. You'll be aware that county highway authorities are recommending a condition, and they're comfortable that can be dealt with in that way. So that's a point members should be aware of. In terms of the primary school provision, again, the county educational authority are not raising an objection to that. They have provided detailed comments in terms of how they would mitigate the impacts. There would be impacts as a result of the development and the lack of school places within the vicinity, but ultimately the advice there is from the statutory body required to provide school places. we've heard about character and appearance, so I think that's been covered. I don't need to necessarily cover that. And the unilateral undertaking, it's a technical reason for including that, because ultimately, if there isn't an approval granted for everyone's benefit here, that needs to be included. But ultimately, that normally drops off at an appeal when an appropriate legal agreement is put forward to an inspector. But it does need to be included. In terms of the highway safety point, I know that's been dropped now, and I think that's right in relation to the advice we've had. The drainage matter, members should note that this is an outline planning permission. We don't have full details, and that's absolutely right. At outline stage, we wouldn't. That's why the reserve matters requires those details to come forward. The lead local flood authority advised that they are happy in principle and they raise no objection. So again, I would, from an officer's perspective, advise against including that reason for refusal. Obviously, that's a matter for members. I've missed one. Oh yeah, sorry. Best and most versatile agricultural land, which is there's an element of grade 2, which it would result in loss of. So that's a matter that would weigh against the development. So there's that is a harm identified, and I think it's identified in the report as well. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Wells, you've heard that advice on your proposal.
I think there's, as always, we rely on our officers for the professional advice they give us, and we are obliged to listen and consider it very carefully. And having done so, I take the point that at outline application stage, the fine details about drainage probably wouldn't be an appropriate thing to expect us to consider this evening. So whilst I have some sympathy with what Councillor Harrison is saying, I'm reminded that this is an outline rather than a detailed application, so it wouldn't be usual to see that kind of drainage detail at this stage. So I'm wondering perhaps if we would actually strengthen our case rather than weaken it by actually discounting that as an issue this evening. And the second point I just want to come back to about the County Council Education Department response. They may be able to identify other schools for these children to go to, and I suspect in Worcester they may find them. Although not necessarily, because actually in Worcester right now there's a shortage of places, so it's actually more significant than perhaps one might initially think. But we are charged with providing sustainable planning policies. And by sustainable, I think it means things like the children of the households going to the local school and not having to be bused elsewhere. That's my definition of sustainable in part. And so whilst I respect the County Council the County Council Education Department saying that actually they don't object, but it's not their job to think about sustainable development. That's our job. And I think there's a subtle difference between the two. So, Chairman, I'm going to ask Councillor Harrison if he would indulge me and actually take off the drainage one, because I think that it doesn't actually serve us well to put, more is not better. 2 or 3 good reasons for refusal are better than half a dozen sort of scattergun approaches, which just get quashed in an appeal anyway.
Do I understand that that if, as I outlined, this would then come back for detailed planning, and at that stage we could then consider the drainage then?
Yes. So the next stage is a reserve matters if it were to be granted, which would require details to be submitted, which would fix various things. In terms of what's the drainage condition? Is it part of the reserve matters? So there will be a condition in relation to drainage. I'm just checking whether it's required to be submitted as part of the reserve matters. Obviously, at the moment we haven't got the conditions on the table in terms of the proposal, but there would be details required. Whether it's required as part of the reserve matters as submission of a discharge of condition, that would have to come in independent. So at the moment, the wording would require it to come forward as a discharge of condition with technical details submitted and agreed. They often come in at the same time as the reserve matters anyway, because it significantly could affect the layout of a proposal. But so we've got this 2-stage process and discharge of conditions to contend with. I could talk about all night, but it's probably not going to aid us certainly in terms of these the proposal on the table. So I'll leave it there unless you want to.
Councillor Harrison.
So can we put that in then that it comes in at reserved matters stage?
If you want to recommend approval, then we could change the word into include that as a condition, councillor. Thank you.
No.
I think we've agreed to remove those 2 extra conditions, and I think we're ready to go to the vote.
Can I just ask one more thing? The Section 106 document and what have you, there's nothing about that in here. Does that come forward at the reserved matter stage, or?
There is draft heads of terms included with within the application. So it would, if it was granted today, there would, or if the resolution was to grant, then subsequently there would be a Section 106 that would need to be signed prior to issuing the formal outline decision, based on the contributions set out in the officer report. And then subsequently reserved matters would come forward with detail, but actually the Section 106 would be fixed based on what's in the reports that way. Obviously, again, I think I suppose if we can potentially get into that more depending on whether the current motion it fails, and obviously then we can talk about the detail of that in more. Happy to talk about the conditions in more detail as well. So happy to pick that up.
Thank you for that explanation, Kieran.
Thank you, Chair. All those in favour of the motion to refuse the application contrary to officer recommendations, please raise your voting cards. That's 8. Those against? 1. Any abstentions? 1. The motion to refuse is therefore carried, Chair. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I close the meeting.